When I was younger, my complaints about my teenage traumas and problems were often met with something like, "You think you got it bad. When I was your age, I insert whatever sad story or struggle you may wish to." It drove me crazy because it made me feel like my challenges, my stressors were being dismissed. I didn't like it. The truth is, every generation goes through struggles. Struggles are struggles, and no one likes to go through them. Am I right? Today, I'm going to talk about generational wealth, W.E.A.L.T.H, but not the way you may be thinking. The term generational wealth commonly refers to financial assets passed down from one generation to the next. But for the sake of this podcast episode, I want to cover a few terms that I believe need to be passed down from generation to generation or have been already. So you may already know some of them, but I do believe that it's important for us to think of these terms as the building blocks that our generations coming behind us are going to need to survive, just for their own life, okay? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has been quoted as saying, "It may well be that we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and the violent actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people who sit around and say, 'Wait on time.'" Now, Black people in this country have been fighting for civil rights and social justice for decades. The struggle seems to be the same today, but just a different set of circumstances and some false securities. Before we get into the generational wealth, W.E.A.L.T.H, you'll understand why I'm spelling it in just a second. I want to talk about the connection between social justice and civil rights. Social justice is the belief that every individual, regardless of race, gender, socioeconomic opportunities, or other characteristics, should have equal access to rights, resources, and opportunities. It aims to create a fair society where everyone has an equitable chance to succeed, regardless of their background. At the core of social justice, it focuses on actually removing those barriers that prevent these types of things from happening. You don't want marginalized communities or groups to miss out on participating in society because someone is holding them back. So social justice is basically ensuring that all individuals can thrive and do it without facing discrimination. Now, civil rights, on the other hand, is the guarantee of rights. It's the guarantee of equal social opportunities and equal protections under the law. This is regardless of your race, religion, or other personal characteristics. So social justice is the idea, is the belief that. But civil rights are actual laws that have been put in place to ensure that people are not being discriminated against. And that is why the civil rights movement was so huge. That's why I truly believe that what I'm going to talk about today is a generational wealth situation. And it's something that we need to be passing down from generation to generation. I was doing some research about various generations, and they have the silent generation, the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, the Gen Zs, and the millennials, and so forth and so on. And with each generation, you see a level of participation, an increased level of participation. The silent generation was one that happened during the Depression. And I believe, these are my personal opinions, that specifically for Black individuals in this country, there had to be silence. Like, we were oppressed at that time. Then you get to the baby boomers, where the civil rights movement happened and people began to have a voice. And the voices became a little bit more clear. And I talk about this in a video that is going to be coming up, where I'm talking about how to own your voice. And I believe that when the civil rights movement happened, that was when our culture started to find their voice. And then as the ages go on, the generations come about, new, younger people are coming about. These generations are having an even louder voice, which I am so appreciative of. But that is why I believe it is important for us to build this type of generational wealth that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So, the civil rights movement sought to dismantle the legal and social systems that upheld racial segregation and discrimination. So when we look at the relationship between social justice and civil rights, the conclusion for me, anyway, is that we have to start building generational wealth, both financially and culturally. So let's go ahead and dive into what I mean. At church this past Sunday, it was Mother's Day Sunday, our pastor talked about the legacy, the spiritual legacy that moms leave for their children. Our strength, our nurturing, our love, our spiritual guidance. It's something that we instill in our children so that long after us, he was saying our children can draw from that strength, from that spiritual awareness, from that nurture, from that love. Baby boomers, they endured the civil rights movement. So we learned from their actions, and we have to hold true to that. The silent generation, they had the Great Depression. They taught us how to endure, how to overcome these dire straight situations. Now, the lessons that they learned, they passed them down so that we could survive anything that might come up like that. And I'm saying this because as we start thinking about generational wealth, those are the things we need to think about. How can we start building a legacy? How can we start creating generational W.E.A.L.T.H for those that come behind us? What could that potentially look like from a social justice perspective? Okay. That's what I want to talk about. I'm actually ashamed, if I'm being honest, of the Gen Xers because, I mean, our parents really did. I don't want to say I'm ashamed. What I'll say is I can see where there is room for improvement with the Generation X because our parents really just tried to give us the things that they did not have. And that made us a slight big spoiled. We're a little spoiled. We want things the way we want them. We have a little bit of an entitlement issue with respect to having things our way, not wanting to put forth a lot of effort, wanting to have things handed to us. I'm sorry, guys. If you're in my generation, you know it's true. You know. You already know. But anyway, this has led us to complacency, tolerance, and selfishness. And in some ways, it's not all our fault. Like I said, our parents really did want the best for us. They wanted us to have something that they didn't have. Because believe it or not, if you think about it, if you think about generationally, our parents had parents that were really, truly struggling, or our parents themselves. I know for me, my mother was a part of the civil rights movement. So she has certain attitudes and perspectives about things that, she was sort of, influenced with and so she reacted and behaved a certain way. So she wanted my brother and me to have more than she had to have. She wanted to afford us more opportunities. And because of that, we became slightly more spoiled. Okay. So I understand this. But it is time for us to do something different, Gen Xers, so that we can get a different result and that we can start to build what I'm calling generational W.E.A.L.T.H. So let's dive in. The first thing I want us to do when we are building generational W.E.A.L.T.H. is we have to start operating from a position of excellence. This means we have to have a willingness to participate when things get hard. Now, in recent months, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, there has been a boycott of certain stores. Target, Walmart, Lowe's, H&M, McDonald's, Sam's, and Amazon because they all rolled back their DEI policies. Now, my question for you is, have you been willing to participate, or are you still go into these stores. Willingness is something that we have to start building as a generational wealth component, because there may come a time when we have to be active in some sort of a fight to maintain our liberties. And that doesn't have to be a violent fight. I just mean like maybe doing something like not giving money to stores that are clearly not interested in supporting. Even after they've said they're going to support, they pull back that support. Why? Do we want to support something like that? Is there a willingness there for you? Have you taken a stand in any way for social justice for anyone? Have you been willing? If you didn't answer in the best way, then you have an opportunity. Okay? You can start today being more willing to participate in some things that are going to be more beneficial for your future and the generations that come behind you. Additionally, we cannot talk about generational wealth without talking about actual wealth. Okay, so what does that mean? Obviously, money is an issue. Obviously, generational wealth is talking about money. Okay. If you haven't listened to my previous podcast where I talked with Michelle Washington, boy, did you miss a treat. Michelle is the VP of a bank here in the area, but she also happens to be a Black woman, and she laid it down. Okay. She told us the truth and nothing but the truth about the financial industry. And some of the things that we've been telling ourselves is not true. And she sort of dispelled some of that for us in the podcast, in addition to giving us a playbook on how we can show up with excellence when we are trying to get business funding or just buying a house or just dealing with the banks in general. She laid down the facts. So if you're looking to build generational wealth with your money, with your building a legacy of finances that your children can access when you're gone, I suggest you go and listen to that podcast episode. All right. Financial literacy or building a financial legacy doesn't always mean you are rich beyond measure and you got money just dripping off of you. The fact that you are able to teach your children, the generations behind you, about financial literacy is the equivalent of teaching them how to fish so that they will always be able to eat. That's what we're talking about here. You got to understand financial literacy before you can teach it to your children. And I'm guilty. I have struggled in this area because of the way I was raised and the mindsets that I've had around money. So I definitely understand it can be difficult to wrap your mind around all the things, but it's important to do it, because if we're going to build generational W.E.A.L.T.H, we have to have a willingness and we have to understand financial literacy so that we can build wealth. Okay? Teach yourself. Use financial literacy to secure and sustain the financial freedom that you want your family to have behind you. Now, when building generational W.E.A.L.T.H, you should have a sense of entitlement as well. Now, this is the belief that you are deserving of or entitled to those civil rights and that social justice that I talked about a little bit earlier. It is a necessity. It is necessary for you to expect and fight for your civil liberties and your social justice. Okay? Our forefathers were not fighting for privilege, guys. They were not fighting for some extra, oh, we're going to give you this treat. You've earned it. No, they were fighting for civil rights, laws to be passed so that they could be treated equally. And we have to understand that because they fought that fight, we have certain entitlements. And this is a legacy. This is something that we need to share with people that come behind us. We need to walk in that entitlement and that excellence. We need to act accordingly, which means we have to show up in excellence. You can't be entitled if you haven't done your part. You can't have expectations if you've not done the work. So here, when I'm talking about entitlement, it requires you to show up as your excellent self, to do the work, so that you can then take advantage of the rights that you have as an American citizen. Okay? So start instilling this knowledge in those that come behind you. Now, here on my podcast and also on my YouTube channel, I'm striving to give listeners and viewers some tools to be unapologetically authentic in their dealings. And that's why I'm adding this word to the generational W.E.A.L.T.H. I'm adding agency, because I believe it's important. It's an area that we really need to focus on when it comes to generational W.E.A.L.T.H. Agency is the ability to act independently and to make free choices. Okay? The ability to make conscious decisions for yourself. Unapologetically. I added that part. This ability comes from being honest with yourself about who you are and how you want to show up in this world. And depending on what you decide, it's your responsibility to do what you need to do and to take responsibility for what you need to do to get you there. You have to do the work. Strive for excellence and surround yourself with the right people. Another word here that I was introduced to when researching this podcast episode was allyship. Allyship is another area to work on if you want to build generational wealth, because it is leveraging personal positions of power and privilege to fight oppression by respecting, working with, and empowering marginalized voices and communities, using your own voice to project theirs, right? Those people who are less represented. So if you want to continue to build generational W.E.A.L.T.H, I want you to practice and build on your agency and also allyship. Because when we can stand independently and do the things that we need to do with excellence, we can help pull up someone else behind us. And then we can lift our hand. We'll know when we need to lift our hand to be pulled up ourselves. All right. Now, often, people aren't saying what they mean. Ever run into that? To communicate effectively, this next area of generational W.E.A.L.T.H that I want you to build on is listening between the lines. Now, Andrea, what in the world is listening between the lines? All right, well, this is where you understand the things and the words that are not being said just as much as the things that are. That is what it means to listen between the lines. And this is extremely helpful for things like understanding your best and most optimized way of communicating, how to resolve conflict, active listening so that you make sure that you are not only hearing what is being said, but what is not being said. And also managing the volume of your personality. Listening between the lines is very helpful with these areas. And this in turn is going to help you hear the things that weren't necessarily meant for you to hear because you were listening between the lines. But it's also going to help you communicate more effectively so you can get the things that you want, because you are anticipating or hearing and understanding those unsaid things. Now, I want to talk about another area that I believe is important for you to build generational W.E.A.L.T.H, and that is tolerance. Now, there's a difference between tolerance and passiveness. And I want to talk about that before I get into the reason that I think you need to practice tolerance or understand tolerance. Passiveness is when you allow things to happen to you rather than acting yourself. It is the act of yielding control or a lack of energy or will. Tolerance, on the other hand, is the act of allowing something to occur. Therefore, You are allowing your agency. You have agency over the situation. You are able to think independently. You're able to make decisions. You are allowing certain things to happen. So it's not happening to you. You've evaluated and you are allowing it to transpire. Okay. So therefore tolerance for the sake of this generational W.E.A.L.T.H building is about acceptance and open-mindedness to cultures, practices, and attitudes that might be different from yours. And different doesn't necessarily mean that you have to agree. Tolerance doesn't mean that you have to agree. It just means that you see it for what it is. You are okay with allowing your opinion to exist in the same space as someone else's opinion. Okay, that's tolerance is that. It doesn't hurt you. You've evaluated it and you think you're good to go. That's what tolerance means in this particular situation. But I think it's important when we're building generational W.E.A.L.T.H because the people that come behind us need to know the difference between tolerance and passiveness, because we need to know when it's time to stand up and when it's time to fight for the things that we believe in, when it's time to showcase our excellence and our bravery in doing so. So I think that is important here when we're building the generational W.E.A.L.T.H. Now, the final area where I believe we need to build generational W.E.A.L.T.H is heritage. This was a big one for me because, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, generations before us left us a legacy of strength, excellence, and resolve, intelligence even. That's our heritage. The freedoms that were fought for are our birthright. If we're to build generational W.E.A.L.T.H moving forward, we have to take a global approach to our lives. Are we willing? Are we aware of our entitlements? Do we have agency? And if we do, are we leveraging it to exude excellence? Have you mastered the art of listening between the lines? And if not, are you ready to commit to starting to try for the sake of those that might come behind you? Or is there a need for personal growth? Do you know the difference between passiveness and tolerance? Do you need to do a little work on that? These are the questions. These are my thoughts. As a mother of 3 amazingly beautiful Black girls, Black women, they're women, I want to pass down not only a financial inheritance, but a cultural one. If you're like me, you'll start building this generational W.E.A.L.T.H today. You'll start right now. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I thought it was good. I really enjoyed learning these things for myself. So if you did, please give this podcast a review, leave a comment, tell me your thoughts. And as always, you can find the discussion inside my forum over on my website. I'll make sure that the link to the forum is in the show notes. And I want to continue this conversation if you want to have it. I'd love to. But until then, please come back again. Thank you for listening to the CEO Mindset Podcast, because over here we are constantly evolving and being open to failing forward, child, because we all know that we learn when we fail, and that gets us that much closer to where it is we want to go, the success we want in our life. So take these tips, start building your own generational W.E.A.L.T.H, and I'll see you back here again next week. Bye, guys.